Welcome to episode 147 of Destination Linux. This is a podcast of opinions made up of 4 Linux enthusiasts talking about our passion for Linux. I'm Zeb, and with me today are the stalwarts of Linux, Ryan, Noah, and Michael. Ryan, how has your week been?
Well, my week has been amazing, but I want to start with, our opening of this podcast of opinions made up of 4 of the greatest minds. Did you change that because we got a little bit of a razzing from Popey yesterday?
No, I changed it because we changed the ending, so I thought let's change the beginning.
Well, Popey, of course, we had game night yesterday, which was incredible for the DLN network, and we had everybody showing up and gaming, and Popey showed up, and he took issue with saying we're the 4 of the greatest minds, because he said Noah and Ryan, absolutely, but everyone else probably not. So that I thought was really interesting.
I don't recall that part of the conversation.
I may have added that a little bit of info to
just
that,
a tad.
But yeah. I just wondering if you changed. No, my week's been amazing. So I have the Pinebook Pro here, and I did a live unboxing of the Pinebook Pro for everybody, and I thought that would be pretty unique, so everybody could see, my reaction and be able to experience the Pinebook Pro at the exact same time that I was. It was punishment, of course, sitting there waiting with that package for my stream to start. But it's been a real joy. This is such a nice little laptop here. So for the holiday season, for kids, for you, for travel, those type of things, check out the Pinebook Pro. Although you're probably going to have a hard time getting one because, as I understand it, they are basically flying out of inventory faster than they can keep up, which is a good sign for Linux hardware and shows there's a huge market for this device. But I will be doing some videos on this, and you can see that we're not running the base Debian, custom Debian that they have installed. The Manjaro team reached out through Lucas and said, hey, give Ryan this sneak peek preview earlier in the week of Manjaro that we're making custom for the Pinebook Pro. And so this is what I've been playing with, and It is amazing. So Be on the lookout for a video on that.
And my favorite part of that unboxing is you're doing your typical launching empty boxes behind you. And I thought, he's going to get to the Pinebook and it's going to be so light, he's going to launch it behind him, not realizing it was in the packaging. But you discovered it at the last minute.
Yeah, and somebody did a quote on my YouTube video because I said, I don't think it came with documentation, but I don't know because I threw all the boxes. And that was like their favorite quote of the
Nice. So, Noah, tell us about your week.
I've been digging a lot more into privacy. I'm trying to take my privacy more and more seriously. Ryan, you read Snowden's book, yeah?
Yes.
So I read Snowden's book. I read Glenn Greenwald's book. I went back and read American Kingpin, which is, if you're not familiar with it, is the book and the story about the Silk Road and the founder and his path. And all of them have government surveillance, privacy, and the best parts of the internet being ruined by politicians and lawmakers.
Yes.
It has all of that in common. And so I've been spending time going through developing different practices for myself. I've been making a lot of use of Tails lately. I've also set up a Tor gateway that I'm funneling all my traffic through now, so that I can choose which network I want to be on. Do I want to be on the public network, which I see is like sitting out in a mall and having a conversation in a mall, or do I want to browse the internet at my house? And to me, browsing the internet in your house should be a private thing, and it doesn't matter if you have something to hide or not. It's just that should be the default. Like, people should start to expect not to be able to see into other people's traffic. And so I'm trying to do my part there and spread that word, and that's been a lot of fun. And it's devolved into what we're going to talk about later in the episode, a tip and trick on how to secure your device in a very easy way that all you have to do is just pull a USB device out and it wipes your computer. So if somebody were to come up and try and take your laptop away like they did Ross, you have an answer to that.
That's pretty cool.
Well, what's interesting is the Snowden book you talked about. And, I tell people, look, you could read the book. You don't have to believe everything in there. Although I think you mentioned even on your show, they're really based on all the story and things that he tells, not a lot in there. You'd go, oh, that's just somebody given hyperbole. He's pretty frank with everything, his whole entire family history in a book. But regardless, I think everybody should at least read it, and you can, state your own opinions on it. But it is fascinating to look into the operations, kind of the inner workings of how these things have grown uncontrollably. And, one of the things that makes me very excited is that this book has never, as soon as I finished it, it's never been back to my house because people keep loaning it and then they'll say, hey, I finished it. Can I loan it to somebody else? And these are friends of mine that are not into Linux per se. They're not highly technical individuals, but they are starting to, it seems, en masse understand the importance of privacy, even if you're not doing anything wrong, right? Because there's a lot of people who love to make that quote, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. I don't care who looks at my stuff. But you also don't leave your doors unlocked, your doors wide open when you leave your home. You expect a certain amount of privacy and things. So I'm glad you're diving deep into it because I'm sure you're going to be able to go into areas that I haven't even yet, and we can learn from that. But it is something everybody should be taking more and more seriously because it's out of control how much has happened.
For sure, yeah. So, Michael, what's new in your world?
Quite a few things. We actually did a DLN game night last night, and it was awesome. We had it for Jason and Zeb. You guys were doing it early in the day it was nighttime your time, but it was daytime our time. So the date when they kind of merged into one, we did a transitional phase where we had both at night, both doing the game night. It was awesome. We played so many games, including Golf with Friends, which is actually quite entertaining, even though. Yeah, it's one of those games where it sounds like it's a ridiculous thing and you're not going to have much fun on it, but because it's digital putt-putt, but it's actually quite fun. And you should definitely check out the live streams that we have up on our channels for that part. And I just want to say that I did win all of the matches because I'm fantastic. But
unbelievable. Lies. But we had some amazing people from the community join in the gaming, and that's what I want everyone to focus on is the next time we do this, you guys are invited to come and game with us if you're a part of the community.
Yeah.
But the one reminder is that, of course, family friendly. So even Popey's son and Jason, I think, had was it a nephew with him?
I don't
playing?
remember. I'm sorry.
But so there were kids coming in and out. So the reminder here is we're a family-friendly show. We want the show to be something you can listen to in the car, and we want, with your family and not have to worry about turning it off. And if you're going to join something Destination Linux Network is doing, please make sure to keep the content family-friendly, the remarks, and those type of things, because kids are either playing with us or watching, because parents are probably like, hey, those Destination Linux guys always have family-friendly content, so I'll let them game with it. And then if you come on and start, talking certain way, then obviously that leaves a bad impression on us. But otherwise, the community was fantastic. We had the greatest time playing games with folks. Michael lost every single game, which was amazing. And yeah, that's pretty much what happened. Yeah, but no, it was great because we got to do a handoff. And Zeb, I streamed for 4 hours. I have to imagine you were up to like 6 or more.
Well, I started at about 5:30, and I guess I gave up at about 9:30. And I was really pleased that I'd lasted 4 hours, because normally with a game like CSGO, I get 20 minutes into it and I'm just starting to feel a bit woozy and a bit sick.
Right.
I was having so much fun getting shot every 2 minutes that I thought, well, I'm just going to carry on and keep running around. And it was quite funny, because in the end, for somebody who was good, I would go first, get shot so that they would not see him behind me, and then they would pop out and shoot them.
Yeah, so you became the meat shield.
Really fun. Yes, I became a walking shield. And for a game that looks so simple, because let's face it, you play it like you would do a game of snooker with how much power you're going to put into the club, and then you let go, and it just doesn't do as it's told. It's just amazing game, so much fun, and the trolling that was going on was just hilarious.
Epic.
It really was great. Good night was had by all.
Yeah, it was fantastic. So Zeb, what was your week like?
As well as the gaming night with all my friends, I've had a great week. And I now have some Destination Linux merch, and it's really, really good. And you can get some too by going to destinationlinux.network/store. So what's really good? Excuse me.
He's showing off that cup.
Oh, look, a Destination Linux mug. And these sweatshirts are fantastic. Just don't wear them indoors because it is so hot. So please, let's just give me a couple of minutes. Now, I'd better fold this up, otherwise Ryan's going to have them. Oh, look.
Look at that.
That is awesome. And I
That's
can't
some
wait to wear
gorgeous
that
merch
to
right
work
there.
tomorrow on London Transport. That should be good fun.
Gorgeous swag.
And you got the shirt there too. You got the mug. You got the whole setup. So
What's
just in
even
time.
worse is I've just broke my watch, and I'll fix that later. So,
That's awesome. Very cool stuff.
what was also good about my week is I was a guest on Linux for Everyone with Jason Evangelo. And we had a great conversation about Peppermint OS. And Jason has now written a couple of articles on Peppermint OS. And I must say a huge thank you to Jason. It has given Peppermint OS a nice little boost. Thank you very much indeed.
That's very cool. And you showed up in a Forbes article, Zeb. So you've kind of made it. You're big time now.
If you're Ryan, you can go tell your mother that you were in a Forbes article because you've always wanted to be referenced in Forbes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I have one of the, those fake photo booths where you get your picture taken on a Forbes magazine. That's as close as I've gotten to it. But Zeb literally is in the article. So that's pretty cool.
Nice.
This episode of Destination Linux is sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly cloud platform. It's optimized to make managing and scaling apps easy with an intuitive API, multiple storage options, integrated firewalls, load balancers, and so much more.
By the way, Zeb, did you know that yesterday when everybody was on the Mumble server, they were on DigitalOcean backend?
Wow, nice.
There you go. And Michael, we also have a bunch of other services running on DigitalOcean as well. Nextcloud services, of course. We have Cloud Run services that we use on the show. If you're using stuff on the show, you're probably, its backend is DigitalOcean.
Yeah, even the awesome Discourse forum that everybody should join at discourse.destinationlinux.network is on DigitalOcean Droplet.
There you go.
To make it even better is you can get all of this plus access to the world-class customer support for as low as $5 per month. Or you can use their flexible pricing structure if you just want to test something out and see whether it's going to be good for you for as low as 0.7 cents per hour. And as Ryan would say, that's darn near free. So on top of all this goodness, DigitalOcean also has 2,000 cloud-agnostic tutorials to help you stay up to date with the latest open source software, languages, and frameworks. So get started on DigitalOcean for 1 month free with a $50 credit by going to do.co/DL. Once again, you can get started on DigitalOcean with that $50 credit by going to do.co/DL. And we thank DigitalOcean for supporting this episode.
So in our community feedback, we received an email from Tony, and he writes, "Hi, in episode 145 of Destination Linux, Michael said that Arch announced that Bash was removed from the new base meta package. That is just not true, Michael. And Bash is a part of the new base. I'm sending this just to keep the angry emails coming." This part cracked me up because we made a joke in the last episode about all the angry emails we got about Arch. And so they want to keep it rolling. And I respect that, Tony. And I'm very disappointed at Ryan for letting Michael talk like this in his house. Shame on you, Ryan. I like your show and hope you keep up the great work. Regards, Tony. So more angry-ish emails, but more tongue-in-cheek there. But Michael, you got something terribly wrong here. I mean, you must be super ashamed.
I'm sorry that I read the notes that Ryan wrote into the notes.
Dang it. Anyways.
But
Michael,
actually, I'm pretty sure it did say it on the mailing list that they were going to get rid of Bash on that. It wasn't on the the article homepage, but I'm pretty sure it was on the mailing list thing. But it could have been more of like the situation where they were discussing that rather than actually doing it. I don't know. It's hard to pay attention to mailing lists because who reads mailing lists?
Exactly. All right, Michael, what else do we have from community feedback?
Dave writes in, "Dear Ryan, Michael, Zeb, and Noah, I am new to Linux and your podcast. My Linux journey began with the purchase of a Raspberry Pi for my 9-year-old son in an attempt to give him an early computer experience like I had with a Commodore 64 when I was his age." That's awesome. I was so impressed with the Pi that I got sucked into Linux and have been tinkering here and there for mostly weekends for almost a year or so. My question to you is, how can someone determine what open source software to trust? With the recent stories on the use of big data like Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, etc., my eyes are more open to Orwellian data gathering and surveillance by the huge tech companies now. So I get and agree with the skepticism directed at Google, Facebook, Microsoft, etc. However, it is conceivable that open source software developers could produce poor quality code, which compromises security, or even malicious code that gathers information or worse. It's like, I'm not a developer, but the fact that the source code is available means very little to me because I simply do not have the skills or knowledge to evaluate the code. How can someone like me identify the quality of open source hardware and avoid both poor quality and potentially malicious open source software? Are the snap stores, Flatpaks, and other repository offerings by various Linux distros considered vetted and safe? What if there is something not in the distro repository but on GitHub? So over the past couple of months, my Destination has become a valued tool in my Linux learning journey. Keep up the good work, and I would love to know about this security stuff.
I'm just going to jump in from my perspective, because I'm very much like Dave. I have no idea what code is around there. But what I've learned in the years that I have been around is that there are a bunch of clever people out there like Ryan, Michael, and Noah who do know how to look at this stuff. And it is constantly vetted by the community. So I'm happy that this stuff is secure and safe. And I'm sure my three hosts will now tell you the technical reasons as to why it is generally safe.
Actually, I was kind of going off of what you were saying. When I go into a physician's office, I don't expect to walk out of there having completed the equivalent of medical school. When I go into my dentist office, I don't expect to walk out of there knowing how to fill cavities. And when I go into my lawyer's office, I don't expect to walk out of there with a complete understanding of the law. But what I do expect is that I can go to talented people that have dedicated their lives to that particular industry and get them to come walk alongside me and look at my concerns and then judge if they're valid. And so what I tell people, especially when we do like consulting from a security standpoint, when we get hired to go into a place and people ask that, hey, you're telling me that open source stuff is more secure, but the people from Symantec say that because they keep all of their source code private, that even if there was a vulnerability, nobody would know about it. How do you address that? How do you answer that? And my answer to them is always the same. I'm here as an industry expert to tell you that the people that are involved in these kinds of things. So take encryption, for example. The people that work on encryption algorithms, the countless interviews with Bruce Schneier and big names inside of the security world that talk about these different encryption algorithms, and they try and spend all day trying to break these things. And then when they're proven to be sound and individual audits come about that go and independently verify the security of things like Tor and the things like Tails and things like various encryption formats, those kinds of things you can trust in. So what I would tell you is, don't worry about looking at the source. It's useless for you to look at the source because by your own admission, you're not a developer. Instead, do research into if that open source project has any audits or any review or any code problems that may have come up. One of the things we're going to talk about later in this very episode is code that I think is great and it does a really good job and it works on the surface, but there are some things that concern me about it. And I did some digging, I did some looking, and the more I looked, the more my concern was justified. And I said, okay, so there maybe is a real problem here. That's the responsible way, for me anyway, to go about the process of evaluating on is a given open source project valuable? Is it secure? Are there vulnerabilities? And if so, what are my chances? And when you start to understand that, CryFS, great encryption algorithm, great for syncing stuff to the cloud. There's no known vulnerabilities in it, but it hasn't undergone an independent security audit. So what does that mean for my practices? Well, that means for my practices that I'll store things on the cloud that I'm willing to be compromised. I'd like to keep them private, but if they got leaked, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Those are the kind of things I'm willing to use CryFS for. If I have documents or if I have files that could not get onto the internet for any sake or reason, for any possible way, if those were to get leaked, it would be very devastating to my life. Those are the kind of things I'm not going to trust something like CryFS to protect. In fact, security being ongoing and ever-changing means that there is no encryption algorithm that we can say is 100% safe. There's no software that we can say is 100% secure. So it's all a matter of evaluating your threat potential, evaluating your threat vectors, and then looking at what that threat model looks like as a whole and deciding if that solution meets your needs or not. So that's what I would tell you.
I would agree with everything you said. I think it was beautifully done, except for the part, don't look at the code, or you're not going to know anything from the code, so don't go look at it. I actually think people should look at the code, even if you don't know what you're
Sure.
necessarily looking for, because in the instances that Linux has actually been hit with certain vulnerabilities, generally like Bitcoin mining type of stuff, or I think happened maybe a year ago or so, was literally they put in the code something about Bitcoin mining in the comments. So anybody who read that would see it. And one of the cool
Right.
things to do as well is go onto the GitHub pages or GitLab, wherever they're storing the open source code, and just looking at the comments of people there, because you'll see how many people are engaged with that project. And if I see a project that looks like a ghost zone, I'm probably not a ghost town. That is, I'm probably not going to install it, because number one, I don't know if it's being supported. And number two, I don't know if anybody's actually who's smarter than me in the code looking at it to see if there's any existing vulnerabilities and things. And then third, what's really cool option, and some people would look at this as an annoyance and some people like this, is when you're in Arch and you're using Pacman, you have the option when you're installing something to review the code right there. Now, a lot of people have made jokes I've heard saying, yeah, nobody does that. I actually do. If it's a package I've never installed before, I will go look through the scripts and things that they have there, because it gives you the option while you're installing, do you want to look through the code? And it's really not. You'll start to see patterns that difficult, even if you're not a coder, to start spotting what they're doing in a lot of cases, which is basic bash scripting text that they're executing through there to know what they're pulling in, what dependencies they're grabbing, and that information. So it's kind of like when people used to say nobody reads terms and conditions, and now privacy-minded folks are starting to read those terms and conditions. Same thing goes with your software. I think you should look at it. For the most part, Linux is safe, but I guarantee you, the second there's a vulnerability out there, it's going to be all over the news. Everybody's going to go crazy and go, oh my gosh, look, Linux wasn't safe. Everybody said it was safe, but like Noah was saying, nothing is 100% secure. And I believe even, Popey and others have said Ubuntu doesn't look through every single package. It's impossible that they even put up. So no individual organization or group is able to scrub an individual piece of software to tell you it's 100% safe.
Again,
just one point of correction, real quick. So I didn't mean don't shield your eyes from the code. I guess I wasn't saying that. I would never want anybody that doesn't have experience looking through code to rely on their assessment of the code for security. If you don't understand what those programming functions do, if you're not familiar with the language, it's not a bad idea. There's nothing wrong with looking through the code, but I just don't believe that it's something that you can use with any discernible certainty of, yes, this is something that's safe to install, or no, this is not. It's more of like it's like the lottery, right? I'm going to throw a couple coins on the table and just see if I get lucky if I happen to notice something.
Right.
That I guess that would be more accurately what I was trying to say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So again, just from a non-technical person's point of view, am I right in thinking as well that when these people are looking through this code, and they do take a lot of time to do it, that there's very rarely any sort of, and I don't know if it's the right terminology I'm using here, but sort of any sort of binary blob that you can't decipher. You can always break something down and get to that text version that somebody will understand.
If it's open source,
so you have to see what it is they're programming.
The open source aspect is more likely secure than a proprietary aspect, because no one can look at the code in proprietary. You don't have any idea if it's secure or safe or whatever. Whereas open source doesn't necessarily mean it is inherently safer. It just means that it's more likely to be, because it can be vetted versus not being impossible to be vetted. So, but in the question of the repos, no, they're not necessarily vetted just because they're in the repos. They're more of like tested to see if they can compile and work on the system, but they don't go through the code and check the security for everything. And that's also because there's there's thousands of packages. There's no way they could actually do that. So basically no distro does that. But there are other situations where, like for example, snaps and flatpaks, there is a security functionality in that so that they're separated in a way. Snaps more so in the sense of how they're all containerized and separated. So like there's not really containerized, but containment system. So it allows you to have more, you can install something and not have to worry that much as in comparison to like when you got the crypto miner thing that was in the snaps wasn't a catastrophic thing because you could just pull that data out of the snaps, rebuild the snap, and that's what Canonical did. They just rebuilt the snap and it's back, and everybody got the new version without the crypto mining, and it didn't actually affect their system in any way. So like there's things like that apply, but open source doesn't necessarily mean that it's safer. It just means it's more likely to be safer. And I'd also say that you shouldn't look at the term open though, like open source specifically, sure. But that is actually becoming a marketing tool that is used by various different companies to claim that they're claiming they're open, and they're not remotely open. They're open-ish, I guess.
We used a portion of open source in our closed source software. So then on their webpage, they'll say open source.
Yeah, I like the term because it's called open washing. So they're like pretending that it's open and it's not. So, be careful about that. But if it's in one of the repos, it's going to be definitely open source. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's been vetted. So you definitely need to, I agree with it, with Noah, check to see if it has been vetted. And definitely check to see if the code has any kind of obvious red flags.
Well, to clarify again, Michael, though, if you're thinking of repos, just because some people might think snaps are repos, you would have proprietary software in there.
That's true. You would have proprietary software, though. In the terms of like privacy, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have security-wise. Even proprietary in snaps is fine because it can't jump to other pieces of your system because of the containment system. However, privacy-wise, there's really no way to tell because they could be scanning stuff. So yeah, snaps is more of like a format that makes it more likely just to be better secure, but privacy-wise, proprietary still has an issue if you have no idea if it's sending stuff back or not. You can check. Yep. You can actually check through your network and see if something is sending, like with a pi hole or something like that. But even then, you really can only guess or assume what they're doing if it's proprietary. So, it doesn't necessarily mean it's more safe or more private, but it's 1,000 times more likely to be versus the proprietary options.
Greg writes into the show and says, "Hello, Destination Linux and family. My name is Greg. I've been watching Destination Linux since episode 90. I use a lot of Ubuntu and Arch-based distros on my computers. I love watching the show to get new ideas for computer experiments, and it also helps me to pass the time during my day since I'm a disabled U.S. Army veteran and unable to work. Thanks for all you do for the Linux community, and keep up the great work. Sergeant Greg." Thanks for writing in and letting us know. We appreciate your service. We appreciate what you've done for the country, and we appreciate the fact that you use Linux helping keep the country safe. In fact, I would imagine that using Linux, especially if you're ever stationed overseas, would be something that would be immensely useful, right? Can you imagine if you bought a laptop to stay in contact with your loved ones, you go over to Iraq, Afghanistan, wherever, and you're sitting out in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden, with no internet connection, you get a pop-up that says, "Hey, your hard drive died or your RAM died or whatever, you swapped it, and it seems like a different system. You have to reactivate Windows." I mean, I can't even imagine. So the ability to just have a flash drive and say, "Hey, my computer crashed, I'll just plug it in and reinstall. I don't have internet, doesn't matter. I just plug it in and reinstall," and have access to that technology would be really cool. So I'm glad that there are people in the military that are doing that, and of course people that are paying attention to the show and listening and being part of the community. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, Greg is a U.S. Army 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. Rangers lead the way. So this is a bad individual in the coolest way possible.
In a good way, yeah.
And he says, by the way, I use Arch. So there you go. If that's not marketing for Arch, I don't know what
I was going to say, is that why the email made it into the read because he's an Arch user?
It may
you realize if you look previous to that, he
don't
says,
you call me out.
Okay.
Well, it's awesome that he is because it's like the being a part. Thank you for your service. We wanted to acknowledge the effort is put into it to help not only the Linux community but just society, because that's awesome. But I would say that probably the Arch part did help a little.
Rangers use Arch. That's what you need to take out of this.
And
what about the SEALs use?
Although I'm not based in America, I would also like to echo that sentiment. Thank you for your service, because any person who's a member of an armed forces who helps defend other people gets my thanks 24/7. Thank you so much.
Yep. And
awesome.
Speaking of it, Nathan Wolf in our patron chat here, host of DLN, one of the hosts of DLNXtend, said, "I learned Linux in Iraq in 2004. So
awesome.
There you go. Maybe there's a lot of Linux going around the armed forces. So thank you for your service.
So we love hearing from our worldwide community. Those 3 emails are perfect examples of a simple question, short and precise, leads us into great topics of discussion. We have many ways for your voice to be heard. You can send us a short email or video that may be incorporated into the show.
If you use
Send your video links. Say again?
Nothing. Go ahead.
He said if you use Arch.
He does it every week to me. Send your video links or emails to comments@destinationlinux.org.
Up first in the show, in the news section, we have Canonical pledges support for Raspberry Pi 4, which is awesome. We know certain flavors of Ubuntu, like Ubuntu Mate, have been working on having a Raspberry Pi version and other ARM device versions, but this is now, the support is going official. Canonical announced that they are officially supporting the Raspberry Pi 4, and in the article they state that Raspberry Pi has established itself as the most accessible platform for innovators, and so they will enable both Ubuntu Core and Ubuntu Server on existing and upcoming boards, which is awesome. And one of the things that it's really cool, because we just talked about in the community feedback that somebody got started because they were using the Raspberry Pi with their kids to learn Linux that way. So this is a fantastic example of, yes, it is one of the most innovative platforms that allows you to easily get and be more accessible to everybody. So that's awesome.
Yeah, ARM is a powerful architecture, and I think that having this PineBook Pro and playing with it, and of course all the time I've spent with Raspberry Pis, proves that how powerful it is. It was really interesting. Before the show, I was looking up because I just hadn't heard. Does Windows even have an operating system that works on ARM? And apparently,
I think 10 does.
Yeah, and apparently they do. I just don't know if anybody actually uses it, right? Because you don't in any videos, even people who do content on YouTube that's non-Linux related, you don't see them. I've never seen it except for Microsoft themselves, the videos they've put out, because I was looking at those for their ARM version. But this is an area where I think Linux just dominates, and it just makes sense that it does, because it's so lightweight, because it's so versatile. But one of the issues that you're going to come across if you get a PineBook Pro, or even if you're trying to use a Raspberry Pi or any of these ARM-based devices as your primary, is there is a lot of software that's still not compatible with ARM. So, for instance, you're going to have a really hard time getting Kdenlive to work, as I've found, in any of even the Manjaro ARM or the Debian-based OS version, whereas, for instance, something like OpenShot does work, and there are other examples like this where there's just not as much software that you can get readily available. So Canonical throwing their official support behind it hopefully means we'll also get some push into the software packages. And Snap saves the day here, by the way, because there are so many packages from a Snap standpoint you can run that I found, which has helped tremendously in being able to really test out on the PineBook Pro, for instance, if I could utilize this machine as a primary machine. Now, of course, I don't mean video editing and that things, but primary from, programming, from being able to write documents, browse the web efficiently and quickly, watch videos and that type of thing on the device. So I'm very happy to see them throw official support behind it, and I hope that means that we're going to get a lot more applications in the environment as well.
Yeah, absolutely. ARM is one of those awesome platforms, but one of the things that makes ARM kind of complicated in doing those support for various applications is that if you can't just support ARM and it work everywhere like x86 can. When you support ARM, you have to basically support it on a particular version of ARM or a particular device. So like sometimes there's overlap and sometimes there isn't. So like that's kind of the issue most of the time when you try, like with the PineBook, you have a particular version of ARM that's not necessarily related to a Raspberry Pi ARM version, and that kind of thing is what happens.
Yeah.
Do you think that the application market is everything in ARM, or do you think there's value just in having a competing architecture for people to hack on and develop on? The reason I ask that is because there are so many projects that I've seen that have come up that if there is an x86 port of it, I don't know about it, and nobody cares because everybody wants to run it on a Pi because that's why it's cool. Is you can run it on a $35, Raspberry Pi. It's not a perfect example because there would be some scenarios where you'd want to run this on x86, but Volumio comes to mind, right? The thing that's so great about Volumio isn't the fact that I could run it as my primary desktop operating system. No, of course not. But it is a great little appliance to throw on there and have it run. There's another distro I found. I was researching security stuff that creates a Tor node, right? Those are the kind of things that are not particularly useful on x86 because the amount of money that you'd have to spend to get an x86 box to do the thing, you wouldn't get any actual extra value of it because it's essentially just doing some complicated firewall rules. So I look at some of that stuff and I have to ask myself, even if it's not for the application development, I think there's tremendous value in the architecture, isn't there?
No, I think that's a very fair statement, right? I guess that was more of from a standpoint of seeing some hardware like the Pinebook Pro come out with a laptop, which people are going to then expect to be able to, like the first questions on my YouTube video that people want to follow up video on is, can I edit videos on it? Can I do light video editing on it? Can I run this software package on it? They want to utilize these when you're taking that kind of really inexpensive ARM-based SoC and you're putting it into something like a laptop, people are going to expect that they're going to basically be able to do the same functionalities within reason that you would on a Chromebook. Now, is that the application developer's responsibility to do that? Perhaps not, right? And they just may decide not to make their architecture there. But I think there is going to be, if you look at how Pinebook Pros are flying off the shelves, I think there is going to be a market there on top of what you're saying, Noah, which is absolutely correct, that there's a whole development hacker mentality when you get these devices to begin with, where you're not going to be looking to run Kden Live on it. You want to turn it into a Pi-hole or something else, which is definitely its first application and primary, and probably a lot of the focus Canonical is going to have on it. But I think naturally you're going to see people migrating that way as more devices like this one come out, because this is a very close to open source hardware here. The only thing they couldn't open source was, I believe, the Bluetooth, the Wi-Fi, and there may be one other component. And that's just because if they did that, then you wouldn't have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, but everything else is the specs, how they built the machine, all of the behind the scenes are all open source on it. So I think there's a big market here for this. And I think the more big names like Canonical that get involved in it, the more it's going to grow.
Absolutely.
Red Hat 8.1 has been released. Red Hat 8.1 is the new version of their enterprise Linux operating system. And of course, if you are a Red Hat fan, as I am a Red Hat fan, then you understand that when Red Hat 8.1 comes out, actually, when Red Hat 8 comes out, it's one of those things that, you got about 7 to 8 years of where you have to start moving people off of 7 and onto 8. So to the next 6 to 7 years, we'll probably get around to that. But obviously, any new installations would be using 8.1. And while this is a point release, there are some important things from what they're calling their mission standpoint, since this was the first release as part of their consistent and predictable release cycle. 8.1 was released right on time, and they'll be continuing to stick to the minor releases every 6 months as the standard. An interesting quote from Red Hat regarding their release cycle is that the predictable cycle allows for hardware vendors to build next generation offerings with clear timetable to sync up against when RHEL would be supporting it. And so in modern English, what that means is they're going to give their plans to all of the hardware manufacturers. So when you go buy a server from Dell and you want to run RHEL 8.1, you're going to have all of the latest features that you need from a kernel standpoint and from a software standpoint to support all of the things that Dell is making in that hardware package. And I think most manufacturers have done a pretty good job of that, particularly with RHEL, because there are so many people that are purchasing servers and loading RHEL onto them, as there are people purchasing servers and loading Ubuntu onto them. But it's an important function that the software company talks to the hardware company and communicates that message. It's important that the hardware company is aware of that, because one of the things that can be very frustrating for system administrators and system integrators and solution providers is you go out to the field, you go to install this server, that network card doesn't quite work right or whatever. You call Dell, they say, oh, it's a Red Hat problem. You call Red Hat, oh, it's a Dell problem. And you go back and forth, right? And of course, that would happen with Microsoft and Dell, or Microsoft and Lenovo, or whatever. What you're seeing here is a very clear intentional effort on Red Hat's part to ensure that you don't experience those kinds of things as a system administrator. I've said this before, I'll say it again. I believe that Red Hat is one of those companies that, back in the 80s, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. In the 2000s, in 2019 right now, we're at a point where nobody gets fired for purchasing RHEL. If you purchase RHEL and put it on quality hardware, you're doing the best thing you can for your IT infrastructure. They've enhanced CVE, or common vulnerability exploit, They have remediations and added kernel-level memory protection along with application whitelisting tech. Finally, with a heavy focus on security, they're adding additional container-centric SE Linux profiles so you can create more tailored security policies controlling how centralized systems access their system resources. And if you go back and look at some of the interviews I did when we were at Red Hat Summit, those are on, I don't think they're on the Asanoa channel. I think they're on the Mind Drip Media channel. You go to youtube.com/MindDripMedia, check out those interviews. And one of I think it was Chris Wright that we talked to, and he starts talking about the new security threat model that we now face with these container technologies, right? We originally went to them because we thought, hey, we package into one thing, we put them into a universal container, and now they can run on anything. That's a great idea in principle, but there are some major security things that have to be thought about. And Red Hat is taking a very active approach and going back and revisiting that and trying to make sure that all of those best practices are in place and that everybody that implements those technologies is aware of those best practices. So I think that's pretty cool. So this is the first release that includes the RHEL development cycle, that includes projects more directly from Fedora, CentOS, and CentOS Stream, the Red Hat Universal Base Image and Developer Subscription version. So this is basically, again, we talked about this when RHEL was first released, but RHEL 8 was first released, but they're basically going to you can get on two different trains, and one train is the fast moving cycle, and the other one is kind of the slower, more stable cycle. But no matter which train you're on, the base, you have this solid common base to build upon, and that's always going to be the same for everybody. So they're not giving up any of the reliability and stability that you've come to expect from Red Hat. If that's you and that's the kind of user that you are, all of that's still there. It's just now they're adding these additional things so they can compete with the arch fanboys of the world and the Ubuntu people that have every 6 months. They want to do that. What they're doing is Red Hat's going to do it better. Red Hat's going to do it faster. Red Hat's going to do it with a bigger backing. And so that's kind of their answer. And so maybe they'll even get people like Ryan on board. You never know, right?
Are you a Red Hat fan? I can't tell.
No, I just, I have a healthy appreciation for companies that do a really bang up job in Linux for. That's all. I mean,
This was really interesting to me. Generally we don't cover a ton of enterprise level stuff, but what was interesting is, if you recall, CentOS went rolling, right? Or semi-rolling, I guess you should say. And a lot of people said, well, wait a minute, that's kind of Fedora's territory where you're going to pull pieces from. And I thought they clarified this pretty well in their discussion. So they break it down like this. Fedora provides an opportunity for developers to engage with the future of Linux kernel and encourage participation to shape the leading edge of the operating system. Whereas CentOS Stream provides an ecosystem developers with a rolling preview of what's next to come on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So helping them build production application with the future in mind. So if you were confused, like I was, frankly, with where is the break between Fedora now and CentOS, that to me explained it really, really well there.
So now we get to a part of the show, a part of the show where there is so much love, it's overwhelming.
I feel
because
it.
let's face it, Microsoft hearts Linux.
Yep.
So much so that they're going to give us a copy of their Edge browser.
Yes.
So now we can all run Microsoft Edge on Linux.
Finally.
Now,
we too can use Edge to download Firefox.
But it's based on Chromium.
GetFirefox.com, the only address I've ever entered into Microsoft Edge.
Yeah. But the problem with this is this new Microsoft Edge browser is based on Chromium. So now you've got one of the biggest companies out there trawling your system, grabbing data based upon a browser from Google, who we know that they're capturing every single move. I don't think I've met a single person who has said, yeah, this is going to be great. This is going to be good for Linux. Let's get this moving and let's get this working. And then Reddit jumps in, and you got to love Reddit for when they do this sort of thing. They went, oh, yeah, look, Microsoft hearts Linux so much, they've copied the Firefox icon. Boy, does it look like
It's basically just the Firefox icon flipped upside down with different colors. It's shocking.
With the Microsoft blue color, yeah. And then the love keeps growing, because not only have they done this, but on probably the most secure operating system out there, they're going to give us Microsoft Defender. What are they defending us against?
It's a never-ending well of love.
I just
They're
don't
defending
get,
us against their own issues.
But I just don't get why Linux needs Microsoft Defender. What possible benefit is it going to bring to us? So this is where we need, again, Ryan and Noah and Michael to give us the technical details behind this. Why do we need Defender? I thought so. No answer.
No, I'm convinced that we can do this. It just takes a little bit of creativity and, frankly, a little bit of made-up information, but we can get there. So let's start with this. The benefit of Microsoft Edge on Linux. I doubt very much that Microsoft is just going to release Chromium with a different icon and a different name, right? Eventually, they're going to start to put their own spin on it. I think their own spin is going to come in the form of, first, data metrics. They're going to be some collecting. But I also think that they're likely to implement and test things in Edge that won't be tested in other browsers, and they will work with companies to create requirements for Edge. So we saw that back in the ActiveX days, right? They came up with this ActiveX protocol. They have this thing that can do some more advanced scripting stuff inside of the browser. It's horribly insecure. It makes the thing crash all the time. It's a pain. It never really works. But hey, it's available. So you have a lot of companies, particularly security DVR companies, that said it only works in Internet Explorer. From that perspective, I think it's beneficial to Linux because there's going to be a number of software applications. There's going to be a number of sites that are going to be optimized specifically for Microsoft Edge, if only because Microsoft is such a large company, has the capital, has the expenditure, has the brand reputation to go into businesses and say, hey, if you're going to deploy across a hotel chain for 700,000 hotels, you'd probably want to use a browser that has some industry support, and good luck ever getting somebody on the phone at Google. Microsoft, we're here to help. I think there's a model in there somewhere. How valuable it is, meh. At the end of the day, we're still operating on web standards, so I don't know. But that's the first thing that comes to mind is we will have access to the same software package as everybody else. And so we won't be the outsiders if you're running Linux on the desktop. So I think there's a small win there. I also think there's a win in that Microsoft clearly is interested in extending an olive branch to developers, right? If you looked at the questionnaire that they sent out, it was a lot of questions about web developers and what they want and what their expectations are and, what their activities are and what they use Linux for. So I think that general interest in Linux is good, even if in this case it results in essentially a no-name fluff thing. As far as Windows Defender,
so I can take this one.
Good.
By the way, great point on the whole kind of releasing software that only will work probably on this new browser version, because we've seen Google do this, right? If you go into, say, Google Docs for whatever reason, maybe you just hate yourself, and you use their services and you use Firefox browser, things like cut and paste and keyboard shortcuts with the mouse are disabled. And that to me is purpose. They do this on purpose. That's my opinion. But and YouTube tends to upload slower and other things that they do with their services that if you have that Chrome browser, it speeds it up. And my guess is, Microsoft essentially has given up here that their Internet Explorer is ever going to be taken seriously. Now that it's based on Chromium, it probably is going to have some feet here, but this also is probably really tough news for Firefox, who's going to be constantly battling to keep up with the changes because the standard basically is Chromium. I mean, Chromium now is going to have, 95% or more of the market. I mean,
it's not that much,
I think
but it
80,
is huge.
80, yeah,
it's about
80,
80%. Yeah,
80.
Like,
yeah. So I
Chrome
mean,
is huge, but it's not that big. But also, the standards are already set because there's a consortium for web standards. So Chrome doing their own thing is blocking and breaking standards. So we already have an actual standard system in web development that Chrome and Google just decide to not care about. And that's why it's horrible that they have all these things about it's working just in these browsers or whatever, because they're violating the standard systems that they helped even create. So
now,
and now they're creating new standards like with AMP, right?
Yeah, well, that's a new standard, but also that standard was locked to Google, and now that's being open source now too. But either way,
right. But what I'm saying is that's not good for an open web, though, even if it is an open standard.
Yes, it's a caching system now. Like it's not as bad as it was when they first announced AMP. It was awful, but they're leaning more towards not being the Google that we know and hate. They're becoming the one that they pretend to be in the past of being the open thing. So they're like, hey, I know you don't like what we're doing, but here's the thing that we're trying to get you to like us again. That's what they're kind of doing with AMP. But the Edge browser is something that I totally understand why people want it to have it, because especially web developers, because it allows web developers to use Linux and then test on the one browser that they couldn't use, except for like Safari. You have to have a Mac in order to use Safari. Even Windows.
The greatest browser ever.
Actually, that is not true. They Apple this week, Apple made an announcement. They released Mac OS, or they released something that you can virtualize now. Yeah, so you can actually run Mac OS on a virtual machine in Linux.
There's been a version of Safari that ran on Windows in the past.
Yeah, they canceled it like years ago. Yeah.
So going back to the Defender discussion, I think Defender is interesting. So you got to follow me here on this tale. But back when I was, in Windows, Microsoft Windows was just, it's like, it was great for business. Every single computer was infected with some kind of malware or virus or whatever. And it was just constant. Microsoft Defender came out for the OS, and it did help a lot of the people who refused to go out and get something, one of the other virus protection programs out there like WebRoot or whatever was popular at the time, because it was built into the OS. This was also about the time that Apple was running a ton of ads, if you recall, talking about, hey, I don't have viruses on Mac OS. They had the two characters, one represented the PC, one represented the Mac. And so Defender was a good attempt at Microsoft, although a lot of people don't like it for various reasons, was a good attempt to remove some of that constant, malware and things that were happening on a machine. Now with Linux bringing Microsoft Defender, they are not targeting consumer level. They're not targeting the desktop. They are going after the enterprise level consumer here, and people who are using, for instance, Azure, and they're using Office 365. And essentially, well, this is a quote from them. Microsoft putting a heavy focus on security integrations. It's built into Defender ATP, Office 365, and Azure. We have signals built into events. Behaviors and things are simple as a user logged into a machine, or as complicated as the behavior of the memory layout in a Word document on the device is different to what it would normally look like. So essentially, they were looking for signals and patterns using Defender of what somebody does when they log into a server to determine, hey, you may have an intrusion, you may have something else going on your device, for enterprise level customers who are using the Azure platform, which of course is based on Linux. So therefore, that's why they're bringing Defender to Linux there. And so essentially, you're going to have sensors across all the various identities and be doing some detection here. So I don't think this is something that's not needed. Again, like we've said before, all of this is self-serving, which I guess is to be expected. And it's not as very exciting to your desktop users, probably.
Well, I mean, there's also...
Why still call it Windows Defender? Why call it Windows Defender? Why not rename it Defender and say it's a platform agnostic?
Well, they named it Microsoft Defender now. It's not Windows Defender.
Oh, they did. Okay. Yep. Okay, good.
But it still is the Windows thing, because like when you say that it's a even if it's Microsoft Defender, it's still looking for Windows vulnerabilities, and it's looking on a Linux system. Like, because there's some issues with, like, if you look at most of the antivirus stuff for Linux, it's actually looking for Windows problems. Because if you have a Linux system on a network that has a Windows network, you can accidentally infect a Windows system because it's so awful from a network hack. Because if you happen to have the files on a Linux server, like, they get it into a printer that happens to be running a Linux system on the printer, and they get those files there, and they can have that networked into the regular Windows platforms, and they can bypass it there. They're not actually infecting the printer. They're infecting the Windows network because it's Windows. So most of these antiviruses are just looking for those things, including this Windows or Microsoft Defender. It's just looking for problems that it itself is the cause of. So yeah, it's good that they have that, and I do think that it would be good if we had I don't think that we necessarily need a Windows, not Windows, but an antivirus on Linux by default because of the structure of Linux itself, but also because the majority of those antiviruses are not really looking for Linux-based antiviruses, because there's very, very few of them, and most of them that do exist have already been patched a long time ago. And we do have vulnerabilities every now and then, but they're not like virus issues. And when we do get viruses that do happen, which are super rare, they're patched almost immediately and just make the system more secure. Now, firewalls, on the other hand, it wouldn't hurt to have a firewall by default.
Yeah. So it was interesting in our patron chat here. There was a question asked, and Michael, I wanted you to take this if you would, because you've talked about this before. Someone asked, isn't Chromium open source and Google's Chrome based on Chromium as Edge is? So I've heard this a lot in the community. It's something that goes around where, hey, I don't want to use Google Chrome, so I use Chromium, and therefore I'm still supporting kind of open source. That's not really the case.
I mean, technically speaking, you are supporting open source because Chromium itself is open source, which was open sourced by Google because Google makes Chromium. Google makes Chrome and Chromium. A lot of people aren't aware that Chromium is a Google project. And anything based on Chromium or just using Chromium, you're still helping Google try to get dominance over the web and do the atrocities that they are doing with the breaking standards everywhere because they can. That's really what's happening. That's why I don't promote anything that's based on Chromium, even if it's slightly better than the Google Chrome itself, because of the fact that it's technically open source, but they're also not fully open because they sometimes do things like occasionally a full open source project would never have binary blobs randomly show up in the project, which has happened with Chromium. And there's also like trademark restrictions when you use Chromium and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So
the first thing Chromium asks you when you load it is sign into your Google account. So there's a lot of integration with Google right in Chromium. So I don't view Chromium, Brave browsers, and others that are based on Chromium as a good alternative, honestly, to Firefox. Firefox is where people need to be.
Firefox is the best browser possible for anyone who cares about privacy or security or just the open web in general, just the web in general, because otherwise using Chromium or Chrome or anything based on Chromium is just perpetuating the awful standard breaking stuff that Google wants to do. And that's unfortunate.
Well, here's the other thing, too. The company behind Firefox and their moral compass and their ability to have all their meetings open and being willing to address people directly and being involved in the community. They're not making from decisions on high and then pushing them down. They're actively involved with, the day-to-day operations.
Absolutely.
The PinePhone pre-order launch is upon us. While many are starting to get their hands on the PineBook Pro laptops, I personally have ordered mine. It is not here yet, of course, because I just get it on the last purchase date, but I think it'll be here sometime in December. The brilliant minds over at Pine64 decided to keep you drooling even more, and so they've announced they'll start taking pre-orders for the PinePhone Braveheart edition. So starting November 15th, you can get on the list. If you're lucky enough to get on that list, you'll start receiving your phone between December 2019 and January 2020. Mass productions of the phone will begin directly after the Chinese New Year in March 2020. The Braveheart edition will also not be incomplete or a developer edition. It's a full-featured phone. The team reassures everybody on the blog post that they have carried out extensive testing and on all known hardware and software issues have been addressed to the best of their ability. They do, however, state the so-called Braveheart edition for a reason. If you're a first adopter, you'd expect no matter how much testing they do, this is a first-generation device. It's something that has not been done. We all know everybody that tries to compete in the phone area is not always successful. I mean, this is a tedious place to be in, and it's very difficult to get manufacturing and to get software and to get developers and all those things to put the kind of effort that Google and Apple have in their phones. And so just be aware of that. But they've made available of the schematics for the phone. So if you're a real tech nerd, I suppose you could sit down in your basement with a soldering iron and 7 months of time and try and bang one out yourself. Pine64 also provided updates on the Pine Time and the Pine Tab development, as well as details on the process where they currently stand. The transparency has been well received from the community, and Pine64 keeps bringing exciting products to the table. So check out episode where you guys interviewed Lucas from Pine64 and got some behind-the-scenes information. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, no, that my son is actively waiting for the Pine Time to come about us, and obviously I have the PineBook Pro on order, and I think this company, if nothing else, they do a fantastic job on communicating and being honest and open with people. They're literally the go-to example.
Yeah, their transparency is impressive.
I love their excitement for their own products. I love how involved they are with the community. I love that they stick to the best that they can of giving updates and saying, hey, if something happened, I mean, if you go through the whole write-up, they give you the whole path of everything that took place that has caused delays, even though what they've said to the community, there's been no big delay. But also they didn't go and raise tons and tons of money and hold it hostage for months or years or anything else to get to this point. So when you do get one of these devices and you order it, hopefully in November, you're going to get your device then a month or two later. So you're not going to be waiting for 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road to get it, which is fantastic. And I love the products that they create. I think that you have to keep in mind, though, like this is one of the difficult things about doing videos on the PineBook Pro is the price points that they release these devices. So you can't go take the latest PinePhone and compare it to your, latest Samsung device.
Yeah, it's not a massive flagship. Yeah.
Yeah, this isn't a flagship device. So you do have to keep in mind the price points and what they are developing. But for what it is, it's incredible.
Yeah, I think it's, and the fact that it's only like $150 for the phone is just amazing. And so I hope to be a part of the Braveheart Edition batch because I can't wait to get it. So hopefully I can get it in time and it doesn't sell out before I get the chance to do it. But yeah, the PinePhone is something that I'm super excited about. The fact that they have all the schematics open, they have like as much as possible to be open source, and then obviously there's not everything the hardware can't be because there's even legal requirements that they in order to be certified on certain frequencies they can't even do that. But I'm so excited to see like get my hands on actually everything that Pine makes. Essentially, that's pretty much Pine 64. Like I'm a fanboy of it. I've only have one device right now, but I hope to have everything at some point.
Yep.
If you want to check out the episode with Lucas from Pine 64, it's an awesome interview. It's definitely worth checking out. It's episode 145.
So AMD has decided that they haven't quite had an exciting enough year for everybody. So they went and unveiled a new Threadripper this week. This has been one that a lot of people have been waiting for and excited about, is getting a 3rd gen Threadripper. So giving hardware enthusiasts what I call the geek sweats. This is a 32 core, 64 thread, 7 nanometer, 3970X. It's the ultimate enthusiast CPU, and they are claiming and stating this is the fastest CPU ever. So quite an accomplishment. This is in addition to, of course, the 3950X, which is coming this month for $749, which gives us 16 cores and 32 threads and sticks to the AM4 form factor. So no need to upgrade your motherboard unless you want to get the PCI 4.0 on the X570. But otherwise, you could just use this in any AM4 form factor that supports it in the BIOS, and you could check your motherboard manufacturer to see if they have a release for that if you're interested. Unfortunately, however, those who have the current Threadrippers, like Zeb, our very own Zeb running a Threadripper, will have to upgrade to the new TRX 40 motherboard to try out the 3rd gen of the Threadrippers. So, Zeb, I know that you like to do a lot of caravan smashing with that Threadripper. To get the next gen, you're going to have to upgrade your motherboard there. The cost of the motherboard will be on top of the $1,999 price tag. So when I say this is an enthusiast CPU, this truly is an enthusiast CPU. Finally, if you're looking something a little less crazy than the 32-core Threadripper, you could pick up the 3960X, which is a Threadripper as well, but 24 cores and 48 threads, 140 megabytes of cache, which is insane. Go look at the i9s and look at how much cache they come with. I think it's 16 megabytes of L3 cache.
Wow. That's a huge difference.
This is insane. And this one comes in at $1,399. All of this in time for the holiday season. So if you're friends with somebody like, say, Noah, like I am, he would probably send a gift like this to me. And I'm thankful to have friends like Noah that will do that. But of course, if you're looking for something to give to your Team Red family member that's not super expensive, that may be more on a stocking stuffer size, they have also released the $49 Athlon 3000G for entry-level computing. This is not going to be a super powerful CPU. However, it would be something that you could have a lot of fun with for that $49 price tag. And they released the RX 5500 entry-level GPU, which is set to release and expected to come in around less than $200. And this is basically to take their 7 nanometer architecture on the GPU and replace the formerly RX 560, 580 line, somewhere in there. Actually, probably more along the 560, 570. So hopefully we will have better driver support on launch with the 5500X, because the 5500 XT that's out now has terrible support in Linux at the moment. But either way, get your bank account ready, because all of this is dropping on November 25th.
Nice.
Sounds fantastic. But just a little heads up and a word of warning: if someone's going to go out and spend, I don't know, £2,500 on this, you're probably going to have to run System 76's Pop OS, because they'll be the first ones to get out the fix.
You're
so
not
just
wrong.
Be careful. You just can't slap it into a machine and expect to run any old Linux. It's going to take them a couple of months. Hopefully not, but from what Ryan and I have experienced in the past, it's normally a couple of months where you just have to wait for all of that goodness to become available.
Yep.
Yeah. But it is ridiculous, like the power that they're promoting with this ridiculous thread. Like I upgraded to a 2700X, which took me from 4 to 16 threads, and now this is a 64 thread. Like that's just crazy.
It's insane, and that shows the power of 7 nanometer, right? They can fit more on the die than they could ever before. So this is just, it's an incredible innovation. And as I understand it, and I don't dislike Intel, I'm a huge AMD fan, as you guys know, but Intel is struggling still to get their 10 nanometer out, which was back in 2008 when they announced it. So they're still struggling to go on 10 nanometer. AMD's on 7 nanometer. Intel's in trouble here as far as competition goes for keeping their lead in the CPU market, but this is good. We've seen prices drop, even if you're out there going to buy an Intel instead. We've seen prices drop across the board because of what AMD's been doing here, and this just goes what we've been saying. Competition is good, and this is why.
Yeah, and you could even say that AMD is AMD demolishing their competition.
Oh my gosh, why? Why, Noah? Why does he do this to us?
He likes to create problems.
You're welcome.
Just when you thought it was safe to tip your toe back in the waters of gaming, Steam have decided to muddy those waters, and they are now going to be launching, or thinking of launching, it's all a bit in the air at the moment, a Steam streaming service. So on top of Google Stadia, PlayStation Now, Xbox Game Stream, EA with their Project Atlas, Steam and Valve are going to get in, because you didn't expect them to just sit back and let the competition run away with them. So, according to a Twitter post from SteamDB, Valve is working on a Steam Cloud Gaming based on a partner site code update, which requires an addendum to terms and conditions. It will be interesting to see what this could mean for gaming on Linux. It's going to be cloud-based. I don't know if Ryan has found out yet whether it's going to be the same as all the others, where you're just renting your game and you don't really own it. But if you think about all of those people that are out there, the Microsoft Xbox, the Sony PlayStation, the Google Stadia, who would you trust more? Any of those, or Steam, who have proven themselves to be friends of Linux?
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about somebody who hearts Linux. I think Valve is definitely that company that has proved that over and over again. And honestly, while they do have some benefit to them, the benefit is so small for them pushing things like Proton. They literally are doing it out of love for Linux. There's not billions of dollars they're making off of Linux gaming and pushing that and putting their developers and things in that arena. I think they're hoping to turn it into something, so there is some self-motivation there, but they're also benefiting everyone at the same time in the meantime. So cloud-based, I mean, this is where everything wants to go. And everybody is pushing their platform to be the next cloud-based platform. I agree with what you said, Zeb, 100%. I'm going to trust this over Google Stadia all day long, because Valve doesn't make its money off of ads. They make their money off of selling hardware and selling video games. So because of that, I don't have to worry as much about them just trying to steal my data and sell it to other people and or utilize it to throw ads in my way. And I also think that this could be huge for gaming on Linux. I still see to this day, I get comments on my videos saying, all right, you convinced me, I want to switch to Linux now. Can I play World of Warcraft? Can I play, there's always some game out there that they're wanting to play, that maybe they've invested so much time and resources and things in that they can't give up Windows entirely because of. And I think when you have a cloud-based platform like that, you have a situation in which you basically can play any of the games that become available on it without any hesitation. I think the biggest problem they're going to have is you have Microsoft and Sony out there buying up lots of studios. And so you may start getting into a situation much like Netflix is in, where there's lots of competition out there. And when Netflix grew to the point it has, which Valve is in a similar spot, right? They're the number one vendor out there for games at the moment. Disney and everybody's starting to pool all of their content from Netflix to make their own streaming service. And you're not going to have access to all that stuff anymore. So you're probably, Steam and Valve is gearing up for an interesting road because there's lots of competition and there's going to probably be a lot of people buying up studios and not allowing their games to show up on Steam. I would guess, anyways, in the future.
Well, there's also stuff like Epic Games is doing the same kind of thing with their store. Like they do an exclusive deals and stuff like that too. But and it's actually interesting because when Google announced the Stadia thing, and when Microsoft and PlayStation and Sony was like hinting at this kind of thing, there was Windows users and Windows gamers who were even saying that they would rather Valve be the ones to do it, because they know that Valve is going to, provide a service that they've proven tried and true that they're going to provide the service that the gamers want. And even Linux gamers in this case now too, they've proven over 7 years or so now that they have the best interest for the platform. Not only they have the best interest for gaming in general, like they have the gamers in mind. So like that's why everybody looks at Valve and goes, yes, we trust what they're going to do, because when they say they're going to do it, they do it. When like back in the day when Valve announced they were going to make Steam, people gave them like so much a hard time, like this will never work. And now Valve is like the dominant force in gaming on PC for sure. I think if they do this, it'll be awesome. Like, this is still speculation. We don't know for sure. But, most of the time when we find something on SteamDB, it does turn out to be accurate. But we don't know for sure yet. Google already announced that there's going to be exclusives on Stadia. So it wouldn't necessarily help Linux. But with Valve, you can almost guarantee that even if they do an exclusive, they'll probably still make it work with Linux, which will be awesome.
Do you think there's any value in the fact that Google is such a massive company that their ability to roll something like this out successfully exceeds Valve's ability? I mean, Valve is a big company in gaming. Don't get me wrong; they have significant resources, but like compared to Google, I mean, like the amount of server infrastructure, network infrastructure alone that Google has to make that kind of thing possible, I don't know. Is there a practical standpoint here?
I don't disagree with your thought process there, but you have to think about Google and just how unsuccessful it's been. I mean, there's a website that's based on, when I'm talking about unsuccessful, I mean with new product launches and really standing behind something. So naturally you think, Google has endless amounts of money to throw at something to make it successful. But there's a whole website dedicated to all the projects Google announced and then abandoned, and it just scrolls and scrolls. The thing with Google is they give up really fast on products if they don't take off immediately. And what they decide is something that has taken off, basically is, it goes viral in some massive way that makes them huge amounts of cash. Otherwise, they give up on it, abandon it, and everybody's stuck. And that's what everyone has been saying, not just us on this show about Google Stadia, is the biggest fear is Google's going to abandon it. So because they abandon everything else that they start in. So, I think that Valve has the gamers' hearts, like Michael said. I think they have a lot of the gamers' trust. And because of that, I think they're probably the only company out there that could compete with something like Google Stadia in an effective manner. And you also have to keep in mind that everybody has so many games now who uses Valve today in their library. So, it may be a situation where people use a combination, but I don't think Valve's going anywhere.
Up next in the show is the Software Spotlight section. And this is a software spotlight that was provided by one of the DLN family members, and that did the podcast host of DLNXtend, CubicleNate. He says that since I'm a KDE Plasma user and I do a lot of stuff in the web, when it comes to like researching and stuff like that, I think you should give Falkon a try. It's not feature rich and it lacks Plasma's integration like Firefox has, but the ability to access like DRM stuff like Netflix. But it has so much less memory usage than Chrome or Firefox, and he says I've been using it for nearly everything as of late, and it might be worth a try. I agree that Falcon's actually my secondary suggestion for a browser. It's if I'm not using Firefox or I need to use another browser for some other reason, I'm going to be using KDE Falkon because it has all the benefits of rendering, and it runs the websites as what you want them to do, but it does it so well, and at the same time it's so little resources that it's a great secondary browser. Hopefully someday it will become one of those mainstays.
We've got a couple of tips and tricks for the week. First of all, if you want to check your disk space, use DF. Now, there's a plenty of different ways to check disk space, and many of them, I think we tend to resort to the graphical utilities because that's what anybody that grew up on Windows or Mac OS is useful. But the truth is, DF is a really fast way for any terminal to go ahead and spit out exactly what your free disk space is. You can also use the TAC-H switch, which will allow you to convert it from actual bytes over to something that's actually human readable, like megabytes or gigabytes, so on and so forth. The other thing you can use is you can use DU TAC-H to figure out the current file or size occupation of a given folder or file or something like that. And one of the things that I'll do frequently, if I'm copying a file and I'm like, I wonder if that's done, and I'm only on the receiving end, I'll use the command watch, WATCH, space, TAC-N1, that means watch every 1 second, and then from that command, I'll pipe the DU TAC-H command or the DF command in, and when I watch the disk space stop being eaten up, now I know that file has finished copying. And so it's kind of a way when I'm on a remote server, I can see, hey, somebody started this command and started moving this data over here. I wonder when it's done, and I can kind of keep an eye on it that way. So both of those are very useful. The other thing I wanted to bring your attention to is a project called USB Kill. You can find it open source on GitHub. And this is a program that it's an anti-forensic kill switch, which waits for a change in the USB ports and then immediately shuts down your computer and wipes the memory. And so the idea is that this prevents what's known as a cold boot attack. A cold boot attack being the idea that once the computer is powered off, there's still information stored in memory for a couple of moments. And if you cool it down, so if you were to take the little compressed air can, turn it upside down, spray it on the memory, you can actually get like 5 minutes of retaining that information that they can pull it out, including your encryption keys. So this is a project you absolutely want to check out. And again, it's on GitHub. We'll have a link for you in the show notes. And what you'll be able to do is check that out. And it was specifically written in reaction to the situation that occurred with Ross Ulbricht. And so the police commonly use a mouse jiggler to keep the screensaver and sleep mode from activating. And so you don't want to rely on built-in X security and stuff like that. You want to rely on disk encryption and then use something like this. Now, I told you at the beginning of the episode that I do have a couple of concerns. My biggest concern is that this entire project is written in Python. And so you're relying on the security of Python for this to work. Whereas in something like Tails, for example, which has a very similar feature, they're relying on the kernel features. Now, I'm a big Python fan. I think it's a great language. I think it's really useful, and I think it's gotten a lot of people involved in technology. I wouldn't tell you that I think it's I don't know. I trust Python itself, and certainly whoever this programmer is that wrote these 6 contributors that wrote this software with 213 commits, I trust the security from Greg KH and Linus Torvalds a little bit more. And so they use something called the kernel memory poisoning feature, which the kernel, anytime memory is freed up, automatically poisons the memory so that it can't be recovered. And so I'm continually working on a script to do that outside of Tails that I can just, I would like to activate it with just a hotkey. So if and when that ever comes to fruition, if I'm ever finished with it, we'll definitely report back. But for the moment, this is a produced project that's out there and available for people if you want something today.
Nice.
That's a great tip. So a big thank you to each and every one of you for supporting us by watching or listening, however you do it. Also, thank you to all of those who showed up in our chats on game night, gave us a little bit of trolling here and there, participated in the gaming, hung out with us, had a great time with the network. Thank you so much for supporting us. Seeing people show up when you're doing a stream like that makes all the difference in the world. So we love our patrons as well, and we want to give a special shout out for all of their support. We do a live show for our patrons, so you can come join us and be a part of the show. There is hours of content literally that you miss out every single week on, and you can get that content for just $1. And that is darn near free. You could find that kind of money just walking down the street and picking it up off the ground. $1 is there. And we also have several new tiers for those who want to spend some more money and have some additional perks out there. We have several new tiers available for you to check out.
One of the higher tiers is going to have options for discounts in the Destination Linux Networks store, where you can get the awesome shirt and hoodie and stuff that Zeb is promoting on this show. Because like it is like, I know I'm a little biased, but it's a fantastic shirt.
It really is.
Yeah, and being a patron, you can get a discount in the future when you get it in one of the higher tiers.
Speaking of support, become a part of the community by going over to destinationlinux.network. There you'll find access to our forums, our Mumble servers. We have Linux for everyone. Das Geek, This Week in Linux, Ask Noah Show, Tux Digital, Zebedee Boss, and new content coming like DLNXtend, an after-show podcast diving into the topics that we cover on our shows. You probably have been sitting there at some point listening to your podcast or watching on your computer and screaming at your monitor going, no, why doesn't he realize this? This is the thing. And then you're like, I want to participate in that, but I don't have time. I'm busy with work. I'm busy with kids. I'm busy with family. I'm busy with whatever. Well, guess what? We have hired people to do that, to argue with us. We've hired people to double check on us and correct us and show that we really are the four greatest minds ever to support and talk about Linux. So check all of that out, and you can find all of it, and you can become a part of the Destination Linux family, because that's what we are. We're a family of Linux-breathing, cult-like individuals, and you can join that by going to destinationlinux.network. Check it out and become a part of the family.
Love it.
And so please keep getting back to us. Let us know what you think or ask that burning question. You can send a short email or a video to comments@destinationlinux.org. We have our Telegram group, our Discord channel, our discourse forums, Twitter, Mastodon, and a whole host of other ways that Michael has put on destinationlinux.org/contact. So please keep those comments coming. We love to read them, and they do make up a very informative and interesting conversation on the show. So keep them coming. Finally, don't forget to join our Mumble server, chat with the community, set up gaming sessions, and enjoy the Destination Linux network.
If you want more content, the fun doesn't stop here. We also have our own channels that you can check out. So you can go to youtube.com/DasGeek to check out Ryan's content, where he fills your brains on hardware, software, and all things Linux. You can check out Zeb's content by going to youtube.com/ZebedeeBoss. And you can find him playing games like Euro Truck Simulator and many other things on his Zebedee Gaming YouTube channel. You can find my content at tuxdigital.com, where I do an in-depth weekly Linux news podcast called This Week in Linux, and other Linux-related content sometimes. Noah, you can find his on the Ask Noah Show, where he does a weekly talk radio show at 6 p.m. Central on Tuesdays. You can join him, and he'll answer your questions and tech questions live. And be sure to go to destinationlinux.network to find out all the other content on the shows, like Linux for Everyone, and DLNXtend, and many more to come. So, yeah, and also be sure to like that smash button and share the show on social media.
Everybody have a great week, and remember that the journey is important when it brings you to the Destination Linux network.
Well said.
Nice. I like it.
Thanks, everyone.